So it wasn't until like I went to England and just couldn't get the meat that I wanted, and I think things like, I don't know what is going on there, something to do with the hemisphere or something, but like the meat just like didn't brown. I couldn't brown the meat. I couldn't. Obviously, it was my fault. I was doing something wrong, but as I try to cook these steaks, and it would just get gray and sweaty, and I'm like turning it over, it's like not browning. I'm like, well, it should turn brown. And then it wouldn't, and it would be like cooked through, it would be completely well done and just gray on both sides. I'm like, well, what the hell is that? So, I ended up like buying things that were sort of pre-cooked, and most of the time they were breaded. And I was like, well, that's sort of plant, shouldn't really eat that, but maybe it's like dose dependent. Is it that big of a deal? And it actually was, because a few months into it, I remember thinking to myself, I was like, why don't I feel as just unbelievably amazing as I normally do? Am I not just working out as much, or what am I doing? And I couldn't really figure it out, but I was getting sort of niggling injuries. I wasn't as explosive. I didn't have as much stamina. I wasn't just go as I normally was. And I was like, I was 25. I was like, is that it? Am I over the hump? Am I just, is it just declining now? Is that it? And you hear stories. But then sort of I looked back, and so my brother told me about Sean Baker on Rogan, and I was just like, well, that doesn't sound too far-fetched, because I did that for like 5 years and didn't have any issues. And I was like, all right, I'll watch it and let you know what I think. And within 5 minutes, I'm like, this guy's more right than he knows, because I had a lot of other information. I've been following a lot of research from Dr. Lustig at UC San Francisco, showing that fructose is metabolized the same way as alcohol, and this actually causes the same diseases as alcohol. So we're getting fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, even cancer and Alzheimer's, all from eating sugar, like in fruit and honey and so forth. And I know in some carnivore circles, like Dr. Saladino and so forth, they think, oh, honey is okay. I was like, well, it's not really. It's not the same as sugar, but it's not good for you. It still has this harmful toxic substance in there, but it's better than table sugar. Great. It's like putting vitamin C in your cocaine and saying you're doing something for your health. It's like, well, no, not really. There's still something bad in there. Just because it has something good as well doesn't actually overwrite that completely. You have to look at.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's him with his honey, and another guy, I don't even know who he is, but Carnivore Aurelius I followed for a little while, and then he started going on about orange juice and stuff.
But remember, this is the same guy that advocates people like sunning their balls every morning. This is who we're dealing with, okay? And so, whether or not there are benefits from sunning your balls, like, I don't need to know about it. So, remember what the source is. Some of these guys, it's like sort of in the vegan community where they came across something, they heard about it, it was kind of cool, and they found some things that worked for them. They saw some really interesting things, and then they just start going into it. But they become a victim of confirmation bias, and they start looking at the things that confirm their previous beliefs, instead of challenging their own thoughts and challenging their own beliefs and saying, okay, well, what's wrong about this? What am I missing? They just sort of go, oh, okay, go in. They went in the right direction, but because for whatever reason, they didn't quite get some of the core concepts, and maybe missed some of the didn't see all the research and things like that. And so now they're seeing some other research, and that's swaying them down another angle. Completely ignoring 12 years of hard evidence from UCSF, showing very, very clearly with hard biochemistry. So this isn't like a study where you get like 5 people doing this and 10 people doing that. That's nonsense. It's junk science. Most of that's a lot of medical studies are junk science. Most of them are, as you have to be able to sift through that nonsense. But this is hard biochemistry, looking at what fructose does in vivo in your body. And you don't have like the Krebs cycle and things like that. We have, this molecule goes to this molecule, goes to this molecule. We have that for fructose now, and this is as hard science as it gets in the biological sciences. So this isn't a question anymore. Obviously you always want to question things. But this is as hard as it gets. And so, saying that, well, there's this study that kind of shows that there's X, Y, and Z that happens that Saladino mentioned. And there have been people that have made videos about that, about the flaws in his argument, the flaws in that study. It was quite a flawed study. So I don't need to go into that, but just the fact that it's better than sugar doesn't mean that it's good. And it has fructose in it. Okay. And fructose is a poison. It's also a drug. It gives a dopamine response to your addiction center in your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. And there have been MRI studies showing that that fructose kills the same areas of your brain as meth to the same extent as meth. Okay. So this is a hard drug, and it's one of the most dangerous drugs on earth because we don't even know it. Okay. And it's in everything. And that's why it's in everything. The food companies know full well how addictive it is, and they put it in everything. There was a from the Netherlands. Yeah, there was one of the top doctors, researchers in the Netherlands said that sugar was the worst drug on earth, and this is the Netherlands. I mean, they know something about drugs in Amsterdam. So like and he's saying this is the worst, and I would agree with him. I mean, because you don't have kids smoking crack writ large, but you do have them eating sugar, and people don't realize just how damaging it is because it does the same damage to their bodies as alcohol does. And while you never give your kid 3 shots of whiskey, probably give them orange juice, just like Carnivore really is a dumbass. And a 12-ounce glass of orange juice has as many grams of fructose as 3 shots of 40% whiskey have alcohol. And it does the same damage to their little body as that alcohol does. And this is why you're getting children who have the diseases that we generally only see in older alcoholics, like fatty liver disease and diabetes. These are almost exclusively in the alcoholic population. In fact, it wasn't even called alcoholic fatty liver disease back then and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It was just fatty liver disease was caused by alcohol. That was it. And then in the 90s, you had a bunch of kids getting fatty liver disease. And like, this kid's never drank alcohol in his life. How can he get fatty liver disease? Only alcoholics get fatty liver disease. So they renamed it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And instead of looking in, it's like, okay, why is this different? They just went, oh, all right. It's probably happening all the time and we just didn't notice it. Like, because, everyone born before 1986 is an idiot. That Da Vinci guy, what an ass he was. Like the people that came before us were a lot smarter than us. And they built everything that we're in. And we have an iPhone and we think like, oh, I'm so smart because I can look shit up. Buddy, think about the guy who made that. All right. He's a lot smarter than you for having been born with that. And so, just saying that they probably just didn't notice. That's all they could do. They didn't have the technology. It had to be very, very, very focused. And, I mean, we figured out the circulation system like in the 1500s. That's complicated. And had no imaging. He had to figure that out all on his own when no one thought that was that things work like that. So, these people were quite smart and they were very, very good at observation. So the fact that, these people just dismiss everybody who's come before us as just not paying attention, like that just, that just doesn't hold water for me. Type 2 diabetes wasn't even called type 2 diabetes. It was called adult onset diabetes. And they had to rename that because I had 10-year-olds getting adult onset diabetes and fatty liver disease. So now it's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and type 2 diabetes. It's just, we'll just rename it instead of actually thinking, okay, what's different now? What did we do that's different? Well, we've been drugging our kids. That's what. And it's not good, So, yeah.
It's not good. And yes. I can't wait. I've got lots of questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely not good. And most people listening to the podcast are kind of, will get that. But I still think it's so easy to just think it away, because it is everywhere. Look, I mean, I've got kids. I've got 5 of them, and they're from teenagers down to little ones, and it is just insidious. And it is something that, I didn't know a lot about. So I was kind of healthy until I understood what carbs and sugar did. But, my older kids, they had the juice, they had the oats, they had the honey, they had the sultanas, all the stuff that I now, like when I found out, 8, 9 years ago, just, it was terrible. And then, of course, for my little ones, I have never had any of that stuff. Completely different.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, well, it is. For my younger ones, it was good. No, my older ones are fine because we are amazing, aren't we? Our bodies are so good at healing, when we do get it on the right track. Most people. Yeah. And I think there's such an element of people that don't know, because we're just fed so much crap. And, you know, we touched on the plant-based agenda. I mean, you found out, you know, science about this, the toxins and the poisons in plants. How long ago? Why is it ignored? I mean, probably like always comes down to money, but you know,
well, I mean, sorry, go on.
No, you go.
Yeah, I was saying that, you know, there's a large, you know, weight of inertia that's just pushing this forward. You know, I mean, it's been so popularized that, you know, meat's bad, cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat's bad, and, you know, and fruits and vegetables are good for you. It's just been, you know, half the world has never lived in the time that wasn't what was just general knowledge, and so it's very difficult to change that. You know, but you know, we are getting, you know, more and more evidence, you know, showing this, and, you know, knocking holes in it, you know, knowing that, you know, cholesterol does not cause heart disease. And people, I ask them, was like, oh, you're on carnivore, but what's your cholesterol? Like, why would I care? It doesn't matter. Cholesterol was never the issue. And we know that, you know, we have, you know, the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, they, you know, published, you know, study in 2015 showing actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 40s and 50s, talking about how they were, how there was like, you know, research showing that sugar caused heart disease, which was a brand new disease. It just didn't exist before the 20th century. And again, it was like, oh, it probably was all over the place. We just didn't notice it. Like, get out. And, you know, and so it was, you know, they were saying there's just like, you know, we need to cover this up. We don't want people to know about this. And so they started putting in, you know, countering studies and things like that, saying, oh, no, it's, you know, it's fat and cholesterol. And there's actually their own you know, data, their own, you know, memos and things like that showed that they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol was causing heart disease when it was actually sugar. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA in 1965. And magically, the USDA declares unequivocally that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol. So, you know, stop eating both. And people did. And they, you know, that was a whole argument on why fruits and vegetables were good, because they don't have saturated fat. That was it. That was the entire basis of the argument. Okay. And so, you know, botanists knew this, biologists knew this, but then it's just like, oh, okay. You know, and you know, and they say, oh, you should eat, you know, and people were getting constipated, they're having other health issues. And, oh, you should eat fiber because that'll move things through. Why didn't we need fiber before the 1980s? You know, and they said, oh, if you want to, and then people started getting fatter. Well, fat's supposed to make you fat, but now the obesity rate, you know, triples since then. It was constant. The obesity rate in after World War II in the U.S. and in Great Britain was 6% of the population. It stayed about that the whole time. Britain stayed about 6% into the early 80s when they changed over, and the U.S. was like 8% in 1980 when they changed over, and now it's like 24%. And so, you know, it's literally, you know, tripled, even quadrupled in the UK. So, you know, and they said, okay, well, you know, people getting fat, well, that's because you're just eating too much fat. Cut more fat, cut more fat. I was like, okay, when they were eating fat, a lot of fat, and not cutting it, they weren't fat. Why is that? Now they're cutting fat and they're getting fat. You know, explain that one. And they said, no, because you need to cut more fat, cut more fat, cut more fat, which doesn't really make sense. It's like it's like one of those like classic government programs. You know, so you throw in, you know, billions of dollars, it doesn't work. And they said, what we really need to do is fund this better. You know, this would work better if it funded better. You throw good money after bad. And so it was the same idea. And so, you know, and that was an argument with fiber as well. Is that the whole argument was that vegetables don't have nutrition. They have like no nutritional value. And so you should eat that and they'll be bulky, and the fiber, you can't break it down, you can't process, you can't, you know, absorb it. So you can't get energy from it. And so it will feel like you're full, but you're actually getting like no calories. And there was a celery diet back in the day. I don't know if you remember that. It was, and you know, people say it's like, oh, you can eat as much celery as you want, because it actually takes more calories to process and move the celery through you than you're going to get from the celery. Yeah, and so they said it's just you can just eat as much celery as you want. Okay, here's how much celery I want. That much, you know. I just had it. Thank you. And but that was it. And that was the whole argument, was why we should eat fiber. Now it's an essential nutrient. Now you can't live without it. And so in order to bulk up the fiber levels in, you know, different sorts of, you know, foods, like, you know, bread, puddings, everything, ice cream, they add sawdust. because sawdust is cellulose, and that's what fiber is. It's exactly the same, and I'm sorry, but sawdust does not seem like an essential nutrient to me. Just wood, maybe to a beaver, but probably not them either. So yeah, so there's a lot of these things, and we have a lot of hard evidence that's come out. And when you look at things from a plant basis, so I saw it from a plant base, and Sean was showing that the cholesterol studies were coming out, and they were different, and they were wrong, and so forth. And there's a lot of studies post 2015 just show that's completely wrong. People with higher LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, they're having lower rates of heart attack, lower rates of stroke, lower rates of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. You think about this. Your brain is made out of fat and cholesterol, and if you're not getting the right kinds of fat and cholesterol, it will decay, and that's what dementia and Alzheimer's are. And so, when you exclude the fat, go into that if you want, the specifics. But if you exclude that, then your brain will decay, and everyone's on a low fat, heart healthy diet, and everyone's getting serious degeneration, and that's quite bad. So he was talking about a lot of those different sorts of things. And but I had other pieces of that, just like the plants and so forth. And so we talked, and he had me on his original podcast, the Human Performance Outliers podcast, sort of early on. It was like episode 34 back in 2018. And so we talked about that and a lot of other things that were in the science. And there's just so much data out there that shows this. And so it's hard for people to see that right away. But when you actually do show them, the sort of the full picture, and you make the arguments, I've really never met someone who didn't end up, agreeing with it. Whether or not they end up doing a carnivore diet or just eating a lot more meat is up to the individual. But I've yet to actually have a full length discussion where they've listened and asked questions and challenged me and said, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? That they haven't at the end of it going like, damn it, you're right. This all makes sense. And most, if not all of them, have at least tried a carnivore diet and have at least up their meat intake. One friend of mine, literally the only person, they said is like, I agree with you that nutritionally, ethically, environmentally, it's all meat is the way to go. But like the thought of killing an animal and eating it, just it's just so awful to me. I just couldn't do it. Fair enough. Like that's totally up to you. It's like people who do other sorts of things. They go bungee jumping or smoke cigarettes. It's just like, yeah, I know it's bad for me, but I'm not going to not do it. And that's a little different, because she just feels bad about it. No one feels bad for not smoking, but you make decisions in your life that are right for you, and that's fine. But
I'd love you to talk about, before we get off the topic, because you're a neurosurgeon, so you'd be the perfect person to talk a little bit about the brain and what it loves and why it loves fat, because I do think it's an area that it's fascinating, but again, is very well misunderstood.
Yeah, so the brain mostly is fat, and our axons, which so your cells here in the axons are like little. Your brain's a computer, right? So your brain goes, has a computer, and then you have the wires that go out to the different sorts of things that they control. It's pretty much identical to that, actually. And so the axons are your cables coming out, right? And you have better or worse sort of cables that run your signal faster or slower. And so you have these myelination is a term people hear sometimes. So these cells are myelinated, which basically wraps fat around them, and this helps the conduction speed of your neurons. That's these fats and fat and cholesterol and so forth. These aren't fats that we really make very well ourselves, and they don't exist in the plant kingdom, okay, or fungus kingdom, for that matter. So these are 20 and 22 chain fatty acids. These are what's called very long fatty acids. You have short chain fatty acids, medium chain fatty acids, long chain. These are very long chain fatty acids, 20 and 22 chain fatty acids. That makes up the bulk of your brain, and these things don't exist in plants, and we don't make them very well ourselves. You have to get them from your dietary source, and so that means you have to get them from animal fats. Okay, every cell in your body is made out of cholesterol. The cell membrane of every single cell in your body is cholesterol. I remember seeing that in 8th grade and was just like, how is cholesterol bad for you if we're made out of cholesterol? It just didn't make sense to me. And it's wrong, funny enough. But, so, you need this stuff for your brain. 70% of your brain of the physical the physical components of your brain, solid components of your brain are fat. 20% of those fats are DHA. You don't get that in the plant kingdom either. You need that from animal sources as well. This is why they called fish brain food, right? Because there's a lot of DHA in fish oils, different fish oils, fatty fish, and that was the trick. Is that because they're deep sea, they don't have the saturated fat because it would solidify underwater, and so they want to be more unsaturated. So it's just like, oh, okay, so this is good for you. This is good for your brain, and it's not saturated, so it's okay. It's healthy. It's a good fat, a healthy fat, and it is. It's fine. But what we think about as good and bad fats is mostly just the exact opposite. Saturated fats are very good for you. All plant oils are very bad for you. They're quite unstable outside of the plant, and they break down into different toxic components and free radicals and so forth. And especially when we cook with them, that speeds up the reaction, because every 10 centigrade you increase the reaction, it doubles the reaction rate. And so you can go from 20. Sorry.
Would that be olive oil or coconut oil as well?
Yeah, olive oil, coconut oil,
really?
avocado oil, all these things. They're unstable when they get out of the plant. Some more than others. Saturated fats are more stable than the unsaturated fats. Things like coconut oil, avocado would be less bad, you could say, but I wouldn't say that they would be good. But they're definitely better. And so when you cook them, they break down much faster. You go from 25 standard temperature and pressure, and then you go up to however many hundred degrees Celsius. You're increasing the reaction rate by millions and tens of millions of times. So this breaks down quite rapidly. And this is why like fresh olive oil, it's a little bitter, but it tastes okay. And then if you let that go, it gets rancid. It gets just more and more bitter. Well, that's because it's breaking down into these harmful byproducts, and your tongue is recognizing that, and that's what bitter taste is. It means something's bad. You shouldn't eat it. And which just goes to show you, like, you should, any sort of vegetable, any sort of plant in its natural form, if it tastes bitter, that means it is bad for you. That is what that means. And people say they like potatoes, but they don't know what a potato tastes like, because you've cooked it, you've denatured it, you've put fats on it, you've put bacon and sour cream on it, all great, and and that's what you like. But the potato itself, not many people have done this. I've done this, unfortunately. When I was a kid, I was just looking at a potato, and everything in me was saying, like, that would probably taste gross, just biting that raw. But I was just like, I wonder what it tastes like. I want to know what it tastes like. So I took a bite of it. It was so gross. And that's because there's a lot of harmful things in there, and we cook it, it sort of denatures it, and then your brain can't really recognize, oh, what the hell is that? So it just tastes mostly bland, and because it doesn't really recognize anything in there apart from sort of glucose. But so it's quite important for you to take in these fats in your body, in your diet, because we don't have them. The rates of dementia and Alzheimer's and so forth, and even developmental delays such as autism and so forth, these things have skyrocketed, and this is a direct result of the things that we're eating or not eating. So to take the two things. There was a study that looked at a high-fat ketogenic diet for Alzheimer's patients, people with active Alzheimer's. And they actually found that as a treatment model, the high-fat ketogenic diet, and carbohydrates really screw with your metabolism and your cellular metabolism and so forth, and your brain. There's a book called Grain Brain that goes into a lot of these things. And that when you do that high-fat ketogenic diet, this was more efficacious than every Alzheimer's medication that had ever been trialed up until that point, by a large margin. And it was already shown that people that had higher cholesterol and higher saturated fat intake were protected against Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and autism. So mothers that ate more saturated fat and had higher cholesterol had lower rates of kids with autism. Mothers who breastfed instead of giving formula had much lower rates of kids with autism. They replaced the fat with sugar in formula because the fat's bad for you, obviously, but you need the calories. So why don't we give sugar? Very, very thought out. I mean, they know exactly what they're doing. The kid gets addicted. They end up eating more than they should. You get a big fat baby, and they don't actually develop as well as they normally would. Mothers that eat more sort of red meats and things like that preconception have much lower rates of kids with autism as well. And these are all correlative. You see a correlation in things. That doesn't mean that one is causing the other, but there are studies that show causation. So the University of Texas, Austin, I believe, they showed causation. There's a kind of autism that's caused, different kinds of, so autism spectrum disorder, there's a spectrum of symptoms that to me means that there's a spectrum of issues, right? And a spectrum of causes. And so someone will have a genetic predisposition to something and then an environmental trigger, and they will get that something. And so there's going to be different things that someone is lacking that will cause a different kind of autism. Autism is just the cells in your brain not developing properly. That's what it is. And so for whatever reason, they don't develop properly. And different cells, you have like the classic one is like, the mirror cells and so forth. You can't sort of see emotion and see how people are reacting and so forth. Because you don't have those mirror neurons. That's a classic one, but that's not the only one. And so this particular form of autism that the University of Texas found, they found that first of all, there's much higher rates of vegans, vegetarians having kids with autism, much higher. So they looked into that. I was like, okay, why is that? And they found that there are some kids that are genetically predisposed to not make an amino acid called carnitine, or not make enough of it. Carnitine is considered a non-essential amino acid, meaning that we normally make it ourselves, but not everybody does, or they don't necessarily make it to the extent that they need to. But this never really shows up in the population because it's, carnitine is in every animal product to a certain extent, and there's a ton of it in red meat, right? But then you start changing that, and you end up having problems, right? Because what's the first thing that vegetarians do? They drop red meat because that's the worst one, right? Well, no, actually, it's really the best. And so if they have a kid that doesn't make any carnitine, even if they're eating chicken or fish and having some milk and stuff like that, they're not going to have enough carnitine. They're going to get this kind of autism. And then you get vegans who don't eat any animal products and they don't get any carnitine at all. Even if they have a slight deficiency, their kids are going to get it. And so, whatever your sort of ethical stance is on eating animals, I think it's trumped by, the safety and health of your children and, your parents and so forth. I mean, unfortunately, most of, all animals in the world are autotrophs, heterotrophs. We have to eat other things, right? So, like plants are autotrophs. They can make energy and life and things like that from sunlight and the water and things like that. They don't have to eat something else. Fungus eats, a lot of funguses eat something else, and animals do as well. That's just the way it is. And I don't think that causing the amount of health issues that you do when you go away from what is our nature and what is our biology is worth it, really. I mean, we're destroying kids' lives and everyone's lives. People are getting dementia, horrible diseases, being sick their whole life, getting diabetes, heart disease, cancers, all these things. Cancer rates have tripled as well.